Welcome back, everybody. My name is Rob Whiteley, and I'm the General Manager of the NGINX or NGINX business unit here at F5. I hope you enjoyed the first slate of content we have, and we're about to enter some additional content where first, I'll talk about how you can bring your modern applications to life with F5 and NGINX technologies, and then we'll get some great examples from Red Hat and Google. So let's go ahead and get into it. Well, to do this, I want to break it into three parts. First, I want to talk about what we've accomplished since the last sprint. What were some of the areas we explored and some of the milestones we hit as a company? Then I want to make some exciting commitments and announcements that are debuting here at Sprint 2.0 that we'll accomplish over the next 12 months. And then finally, I'd like to end with a little bit of insight on how you can join us on this journey. What are some of the ways you can get involved and start interacting with us as our community? So let's go ahead and get into it. First, Gus talked a lot about the different waves of technology, and he also talked about how the guiding technical vision for F5 is something we call adaptive applications. And I'll recap it briefly here to give some context. An adaptive application is one that can grow or shrink, it can heal and defend itself. And really the idea here is as we power the next generation of digital services and digital offerings, the underlying applications can no longer perform at human speed. We have to assume that they can adapt and make their own changes based on their environment, much like a living organism would do. And so our vision for adaptive application is one where that intelligence is built into the delivery infrastructure. It's built into the security and the platforms. And really it breaks down to doing so across two major estates. The first estate are your traditional applications. These would be the applications that power the majority of your business and quote unquote, keep the lights on. But increasingly, companies are investing in modern applications, ones that are maybe cloud native or container based. Maybe they're Kubernetes orchestrated. These are the ones that are a bit more bespoke, and they're often powering some of the newer mobile applications or digital offerings that you're bringing to market. Well, for that as a backdrop, I want to paint where NGINX fits in that. NGINX is really that front door to your modern applications, much like F5 has been the front door to your traditional applications with big IP. And that's been true over the last 20 or so years. All those experiences will flow through big IP infrastructure. Well, increasingly, what we're finding is that a lot of the modern digital experiences flow through NGINX as that front door, meaning we're providing the application delivery, the application security. You can really think of us as that one-stop traffic management and security solution for your apps, for your APIs, for those more modern transactions. And it's very complementary to what Big IP has been doing in front of the more traditional. And combined across the two, not only do give you better coverage, but because we've connected the two and they're signaling that we can pass back and forth, you get that end-to-end experience so that on your modern journey, you'll find that we can help you regardless of where you are. So I wanted to start there because Gus spent a lot of time talking about the different waves. Wave one was all about concurrency and solving for performance and scale. Well, that's where NGINX was born. The second wave is really where we're spending the bulk of the last year as we brought to market new capabilities. It's how do you begin to think about all of the new API capabilities and microservices capabilities that are beginning to power that current wave of technologies. The third wave, which is more about AI and ML and driving good insights, is something that we're also looking at, and I'll touch on where that's relevant. So hopefully that helps as a bit of context. And what I want to do now is talk about how this is unfolding in something that we call a cluster out pattern. And I'll get into exactly what that means, but it's really a typical pattern that we're seeing across customers to be successful, not necessarily just deploying NGINX technologies, but in general, bringing containers and Kubernetes in a way that we can actually reliably power these types of environments. So let's go ahead and get into exactly what that means. Well, the first thing that you really need to think about when you're building a modern application environment is how do I make Kubernetes itself rock solid? It's a great platform, it's very powerful, but it was meant to handle a very wide array of use cases. And what we have found is that most enterprises, when they go to put it in production, find that it doesn't necessarily have some of the application delivery and application security capabilities out of the box, so to speak, meaning you need to tweak and tune. And a lot of NGINX technologies fill that void But really, the outcome that you need in this stage is a production grade Kubernetes environment. Because at the end of the day, you need to give your developers confidence that as they develop their microservices and their apps, increasingly do it in containers, that when they push that container to a production environment, it will be solid and reliable and can scale to meet the demand as the app grows. And that's step one. How do you get that rock solid production grade Kubernetes environment? The second is then, okay, I've built that. I'm beginning to have the applications communicating. And increasingly, they're going to communicate to each other, service to service, via API calls. For some time now, we've been dealing with API calls out of the cluster to perhaps an endpoint or a mobile device, to another vendor in our ecosystem. But what we're seeing is now there's often 10x or more internal API traffic where all these components are talking to each other within the cluster. And there is a whole nother ring of API traffic management security that's needed. So I've made the foundation rock solid. Now I need to make this east-west API communication rock solid. It's what makes the service scale as the developers continue to make changes to it. Okay, step one, rock solid foundation. Step two, rock solid APIs. The third thing I have to then think about is these clusters are not islands onto themselves. They need to connect to something else. Do I connect them to another cluster, maybe running in a different site or a different availability zone? Or do I even connect them to my traditional environment, where maybe part of the app or part of the experience is in a more monolithic environment? Well, regardless, I have to plumb that connection. I have to find a way to not only get traffic in and out of the cluster, but how do I make sure it reliably gets to another area? And so all of these end up being the three outcomes that customers are looking to do as they build their modern applications. Make it production grade, make it so that I can reliably transact among the services, and then make it so that I can have higher resilience and higher availability by failing over, whether it's to another environment or connecting it to the rest of my environment. So why are these three things important? Well, first of all, they're critical to go from the first wave to the second wave that Gus talked about. To get to that area where you're going just beyond basic concurrency into these higher scale environments, you have to nail this pattern. And we call it cluster out because you can probably tell from the visual, it starts inside the Kubernetes cluster, and then you connect to the increasing capabilities. Now, why is that? Because what we have found is that as you grow your environment, you will hit each of these problems in turn. You can go out of order, you can solve the problems differently, but what we have found is if you follow that basic three-step pattern, you'll get Kubernetes, you'll get modern apps up and running. And it's also the way we thought about it as we went across the last year of product development. So let me talk about some of the great things we've done to help you be successful in this pattern and really achieve this cluster out capability. All right, let's talk about some of the releases we've done over the last year since we gathered at Sprint 1.0. And the first set of these are really going to relate to that center of the cluster, the things that help you get a production grade environment. So this would be a combination of technologies that may be run in a container, as well as some of the things that do the traffic management and security in and out of that cluster. So let's start with NGINX and our open source projects. We've had 21 releases across 3 major projects in the last year. That includes NGINX open source, NGINX JavaScript, and NGINX Unit, which I'll talk more about in a second. And really what we've looked to do is make sure that we're bringing new innovation into open source so that you can reliably build and power modern applications. And a great example of that is the technology preview we released of HTTP 3 running on Quick. This is something that you can go pull down today and get started with, and really give some of the developers that are looking to build more cutting edge applications an opportunity to start testing things like compatibility and how they want to build those apps. Now we're going to be putting that into the mainline version of NGINX soon, and we're really excited about what we'll see from our community moving forward. Another thing that we spent a lot of time is then taking NGINX Plus, which is our commercial product built on that open source, and continuing to put important enterprise capabilities in that. So we had 2 releases of NGINX over the last year, R23 and R24. And a lot of what you'll see here is a focus on things like gRPC health checks, encrypted JOT tokens, as well as things like enhancements to NGINX JavaScript. Now, there's always been parity between NGINX JavaScript and open source and in our commercial version. But what we're seeing is with NGINX Plus and some of the additional capabilities there, customers are beginning to do really powerful things by extending that NGINX platform. And in fact, a lot of customers tell us that NJS has really now achieved a level of maturity that's on par with Lua. And so you get that same extensibility, but with even higher performance and higher stability that you've come to expect from NGINX. So great things we're doing in the base technology. Now, I talked a little bit about NGINX Unit. NGINX Unit is our next generation application server. You've always known the core NGINX project as a web server, but what we're doing with an application server is pretty fundamentally new and innovative. We're trying to bring the same capability to just run code as you've always known it, but it's in a dynamic API-driven way that allows for much more modern environments. We're also finding that we support a whole range of applications, so it's really about write once, run anywhere. And that's the power of Unit. And we've really done some things to harden it. For example, we really wanted to beef up the TLS capabilities so that you can now push encryption all the way to the runtime of the code itself, which completely changes how you start architecting things like service meshes. And I think you'll find that we have some really innovative things that we're going to be doing with Unit moving forward, especially as we begin to build in more and more advanced proxying capabilities. Unit will get to the point where not only can it run your code, but it can do a lot of that application networking and application security that you've come to know from other NGINX products natively and in a programmable and in an API first way. So expect to see some really cool things from Unit. Now, what have we done in some of the other projects? Well, many of you know NGINX as an ingress controller. In fact, one of the most popular use cases is to run NGINX. In fact, about 64% of all ingress controllers in the world are NGINX. And what we found is our version of that controller has really done a lot to help bring things like JWT authentication, more built-in Grafana dashboards. But more importantly, we've really taken that ingress controller and begun to integrate it with other tools in our portfolio, such as NGINX App Protect, which is our WAF based on tried and true F5 technology, as well as NGINX Service Mesh, which is our east-west sidecar proxy service mesh, which is an alternative to Istio. Now, having ingress controller automatically integrate with those two things means you can push more advanced security directly to the ingress egress, as well as have an experience that allows you to go from ingress to full-blown service mesh in a very seamless way, much more so than other existing service mesh alternatives that are on the market today. So really cool things we've done with it. And that actually brings me to the announcements we've done with those two products in particular. We GA'd our NGINX Service Mesh. It was available in preview at our sprint last year. This year, we've got it to 1.0 quality. We have customers that are taking it. It is a free product available for download, and they're running it as an alternative to Istio. It's much simpler. It's much lighter weight. It has all the intelligence of NGINX, making that sidecar proxy far more intelligent than alternatives. And it's also allowing us to bring deeper security and deeper ingress egress into mesh environments. And then finally, if you're not familiar with App Protect, F5 is a market leader in WAF. We've taken that WAF engine, we've repurposed it and replatformed it specifically for NGINX, and now we can run it much, much closer to the logic of the application itself. Most customers choose to run this behind a gateway WAF on, for example, Big IP, and run a specific set of rules, maybe additional application security rules as an example, that's much more unique to that environment. And so we've taken things like the OWASP Top 10 for API security and a new module that actually allows us to do distributed denial of service attack protection. So now you can not only run a WAF, but you can actually run an intelligent engine that looks at behavioral patterns in traffic and blocks them automatically. This uses a cool AI ML engine that F5 pioneered. It's something that runs locally, so you don't necessarily have to beacon information out to the cloud, and it allows it to learn your traffic behavior and block anything that sees that's unwanted or malicious. Now, why would you want to do this? A great example is you have a misconfigured API or a misconfigured client. That could launch an inadvertent DDoS attack. With this separate module, you can then automatically learn, detect, and tamp down those types of attacks while still getting things like OWASP top 10 protection for both web and API. So pretty cool in terms of all the things we've done to really help get Kubernetes to be production grade and step one in cluster out. Now, we have a few more capabilities, and I'd like to tie them to the other steps. As I talked about before, one of the things you need to then do once you have that rock solid core is to begin to think about the next almost layer up, which is a lot of that API traffic that's now transacting among all these microservices. And what we found here is we've released a new version of our API management solution. It uses our controller product and it brings lifecycle management capabilities to NGINX as an underlying API gateway. And we did a release of 3.19 that allows us to have better support for that API gateway when it specifically runs as a Kubernetes native container. And we've done things like protocol transformation. So now we can do JSON to XML or SOAP in the API transformation, because we know that not all APIs are connecting a modern service to a modern service. Sometimes you need to connect to legacy. And rather than rewrite that app, we can help offload that into the gateway and then handle the workflow and management of that inside of the NGINX controller API management solution. So some cool things we've done to help there. And then finally, we also know that as you begin to extend your environment, you'll also need controller to help you do things like managing your security policies. So we've released our API security, which is an add-on to both the ADC capability and soon the API capability inside of controller. And it allows you to have additional tuning of NGINX App Protect, but do it natively in an app-centric way inside the workflows you're already managing in controller, so that you don't necessarily have to become an expert in all things NGINX. It also allows you to segregate that using self-service capabilities. So maybe your security team just needs to come in and audit the policy that already got deployed using infrastructure as code, where the gateways and NAP itself, or NGINX App Protect, got deployed, but then you want to expose the policy via self-service to the security team. So it really helps eliminate some of the operational complexity as you shift left in your security and do more things like DevSecOps. So API security, API management, these are things that are really that next tier out as you go from the cluster up. The third and final set of announcements I want to just cover is how do we then take some of the innovations we've learned now that we're part of F5 and make sure that we're extending to connecting that cluster to other environments. And so here's where we took what we refer to as the ADC, or Application Delivery Controller module, inside a controller, and we specifically created some out-of-the-box experiences so that you can connect NGINX to your existing big IP environment. Because chances are that's that external load balancer that's going to route traffic from one area, like the cluster, to another, whether it's another cluster or maybe a traditional environment. So by doing signaling infrastructure back and forth, using Big IP's AS3 framework, we're able to make it significantly easier to operate how NGINX can automatically configure Big IP to do traffic. And similarly, when you make a change to Big IP, how we can automatically signal that back to NGINX. What if you're specifically trying to connect ingress controller as that ingress egress point out of your cluster? Well, we introduced something called F5 Ingress Link, and we released version 2.5. An ingress link has a series of Kubernetes operators that makes it extremely easy to automatically connect NGINX to Big IP when it's specifically operating as an ingress controller. But the idea is, rather than doing the self-service through controller, you can now do the self-service natively through the Kubernetes platform. So really giving you choice depending on how you want to operate your environment. And finally, one of the best for last, we've introduced something called NGINX Instance Manager. This is a new control plane technology that allows you to configure, monitor, track, and analyze underlying NGINX instances in a highly scalable way. Controller's always been able to do this, but the goal of controller was to really abstract the complexity of NGINX and give you a capability to think more about applications. This allows you to expose the full breadth and depth of NGINX as your underlying data plane for much more sophisticated power users. And we're really excited about what Instance Manager brings to the mix especially for companies that have built really complex controlling and signaling with NGINX, that they can now scale with that instance manager. And best yet, Instance Manager provides a dynamically configurable API so that regardless of whether running NGINX Plus, which has always had an API, or NGINX Open Source, which as you well know hasn't had that dynamic API, through Instance Manager. So it supports both of those, and it really provides that dynamic API that NGINX Open Source didn't have, and allows you to get much better operational control over that environment, track instances, get interesting metrics out of them, and really take your environment to the next level. So those are some of the capabilities we see that help really improve the resilience and the availability of your clustered environment. And so that's what we've accomplished over the last year. What I'd like to do now is pivot to what we're going to do over the next year. And here I want to talk about 3 specific announcements. But first, I'm going to cover 3 commitments we want to make, because I want you to walk away from this sprint thinking a little bit differently about how we've operated. And part of that is we've been part of the F5 family for 2 years now, and we've had an amazing ability to expand our capabilities and resource. And we're at a point now where we're prepared to make some interesting commitments to you, our community. And then I think you'll see how that translates to an exciting set of announcements. So let's get into those. The first commitment I want to make is that we will increase our open source development and encourage contribution from you, our community, back to the open source capabilities that we release here at NGINX. Look, I'll be honest with you. NGINX open source project has not always been the easiest thing to contribute to. We know, we get it. And part of that is because we take running over half the internet very seriously. We can't just take contributions off the shelf because we risk destabilizing the core web server that powers so many critical web experiences. And so in many cases, we have to rewrite contributions or take them as great ideation and then build them into the platform ourselves. And that's because NGINX is a very mature project. We're actually coming up on the 16th and soon 17th year of it running. However, as we look to release new open source projects, I think you find we have a new opportunity. These don't have the legacy and the maturity of NGINX, and therefore we will look to community contribution day one. We would love your help building and extending new modern application environments as we get started. So the first part of the commitment is, hey, we'll increase more, and we want you to help. Now, we know what our core capability is. It's layer 7 networking, layer 7 security, layer 7 observability. That's what we're really good at. So all of the projects will center around that if they carry part of the NGINX name, and we hope you'll work with us to develop those moving forward. But the other thing I want to commit to is that we'll adhere to best practices. These will be born in GitHub. We will use issue tracking. We will be much more responsive, both in our outreach as well as in the various communities that have formed around NGINX. And we'll make sure that we're doing documentation day one from these open source so that you know how to use them and then build them into your environment. So a lot of this may sound like, of course, we should be doing this stuff, but it's really important that we be transparent about some of the efforts we're investing in behind the scenes to bring great technology to market. So commitment number 1, more open source using open source best practices. The second commitment I'd like to make is that we really want to continue innovating in the data plane. Now, I've used this term a few times, but just in case you're not familiar, let me pause. A typical application stack, as far as we're concerned, is a data plane, the thing that routes, controls, shapes, secures traffic. There's a control plane that then configures and gives the state to that data plane, as well as orchestrates all of that. And then there's a management plane that has more advanced analytics, user management, workflow management that is an even abstracted above the control plane. And we have always participated predominantly from an open source perspective at the data plane. A good example would be NGINX itself, or Unit, or mod security. All of these are things that exist as an element in the path of the data and do something to route, shape, or secure that traffic. Well, one of the things that we want to commit to is open sourcing at all levels of that stack. A good example of something we've already done is NGINX ingress controller, because you can really think of an ingress controller as a control plane. It basically knows how to receive signaling from Kubernetes and act upon an underlying proxy acting as an ingress controller. So that's a great example of something we've already done, but I think you'll find we're going to do a lot more and get all the way up into open source management tools. That way you can build an entire application stack using open source technologies from NGINX, or swap them out for your favorite open source component from others in the ecosystem. But to do that, we also want to make sure that we really innovate at that data plane level. So I think what you'll find is that we're going to continue to push the boundaries on things like JavaScript and Unit, which are two of the newer projects in our portfolio. And then finally, we want to make sure that we're doing all of this in a way where it's not only useful and powerful day one, but gives you a seamless experience to step up to more capable enterprise elements. And that's the third commitment I want to make. We know that as a developer, it is difficult to sometimes rely on open source if you feel some of the features are going to be held back for a commercial version. And that's one of the reasons why we want to get very clear and consistent and transparent about how we do open source versus commercial moving forward. And so we're going to take the capability to have a philosophy. Open source will always be something that is ready and production grade for developers and small application teams, meaning it's not just for test dev environments. You can expect features and functions in our open source that will be available for you to build an application and run that application in production. And so that's something we've always taken very seriously with NGINX open source. And so as we continue to go up the stack, we will always make sure we adhere to that principle. But we also know that once that application starts scaling, there's a very specific set of needs that the platform team who's responsible for operating and securing it will have. And that's what we're going to hold for the commercial versions. And you'll find there'll be a consistent set of additional security, observability, governance, and scale features that will be in the commercial offerings. And so what we want to do is give you the confidence that as a developer, you can build your app and rely on NGINX. You don't need to fork it or worry about other features being held back. And then as you move that application to production, you can seamlessly step up to a commercial version or an enterprise version of that solution that adds the additional capabilities that site reliability engineers, security teams, DevOps teams would need as part of that platform function to really operate it at scale. To be honest, it's very similar to what companies like Hashi do, and I think you'll find that that model will scale really well, and it's quite frankly something that we've been doing for many years as part of NGINX open source and NGINX Plus, but by being more transparent in how we do it, it'll allow you to have confidence that you don't need to necessarily fork or abandon NGINX as your application grows. Now, as we make those commercial versions available, we will also release them as both paid subscriptions as software and SaaS. You haven't seen a lot of SaaS from NGINX yet, but we're going to increasingly invest in that area thanks to a lot of the capabilities we now have available to us inside the F5 portfolio that allows us to accelerate innovation along that domain too. So those are the commitments, and I wanted to set that as a backdrop. More open source at best practice. We'll definitely innovate in the data plane as well as throughout, and we'll make sure that we do it in a clear and consistent way so that you can rely on NGINX for your modern app stacks. So let's change now to how are we going to make some cool new announcements and new capabilities in the next year. The first thing I want to announce is that NGINX is joining forces with the Kubernetes community. We've always participated in the Kubernetes community, but we haven't been a big contributor and maintainer of some of the NGINX projects, and that changes today. One of the things that we want to do is take a very active role in the Ingress project, which is part of Kubernetes. First of all, I want to thank Alejandro, who is the founder and has been the lead project manager for the Ingress project for all these years. He's done phenomenal work and has made NGINX synonymous with Kubernetes Ingress. But as he steps aside, we want to make sure that we help fill that void. We want to contribute resources, both in project management and more importantly, in engineering, to make sure that we are contributing code, that we are making Ingress as fast, as reliable, and as lightweight and stable as possible. Now, we're not looking to come in and push our commercial technology. There's no nefarious motive here. What we're looking to do is take the ability to know how NGINX runs and give that back to the Ingress project and make that project as absolutely rock solid as possible. And we're going to put our money where our mouth is and donate that manpower and really make sure that we're have staff that are dedicated to nothing other than the Ingress project. The other thing is we'll look at other projects in the Kubernetes, but I don't want to quite get into that detail. In fact, I'm going to ask you to stay tuned. Mark Church from Google is coming up next, and he'll get into some specific announcements that NGINX is doing as well, and I think you'll like to see that. So first and foremost, I'm here to announce you'll see a much bigger role from NGINX in the Kubernetes community. The second announcement really builds on something I talked about earlier. How do we make sure that we are open sourcing technologies at every layer of the stack, at the data plane, at the control plane, and at the management plane? And so what we want to do is commit here today that you will see new tools from us. And there's going to be 2 projects that come out in the next 6 to 12 months that are going to specifically tackle this. 2 brand new open source projects. Now, I'm not going to tell you exactly what they are because they're not ready. We don't have all the documentation. We don't have them up in GitHub. And I don't want to announce something that you can't go experience right this minute. But I want to take the opportunity to say some of the things we're doing in microservices and some of the things that we're doing around enabling platform teams to operate their NGINX fleets are things that we believe we can put into open source to make it even easier to build and operate applications at scale. And there'll be some of the first things out of the chute that adhere to this new philosophy around open source is always for developers and small app teams, and the commercial will hold features for those enterprise teams and platform teams. So look forward to that. Now, we will also have another exciting announcement that we're going to be making very shortly that actually isn't an NGINX-based technology at all. As we continue to bring new capabilities to market, just like any company, we've had to build unique capabilities internally. And we want to make sure that if that is a good candidate for open sourcing, that we push that out to the community. So stay tuned. In the very short future, we're going to be announcing a platform agnostic developer tool that enables you to build great modern applications. It has nothing to do with core underlying NGINX technology. It's just a little bit of the thought leadership and capability that we want to give back, because we know that the more that we build amazing digital experiences, the more that we as an industry will move forward. So that's the second announcement around new projects coming from NGINX. And then finally, I also want to make sure that I talk about a really cool opportunity we have around building a complete ecosystem that is available in open source and is readily available. Now, this is something that is available today. In fact, there's going to be a whole demo on this tomorrow. We call this the Kubernetes Ingress Control Reference Architecture, or the modern reference architecture. And what it does is it takes the ability to take the sample application, a microservices-based application. In this case, we're using the Bank of Anthos from Google, and it takes all the ancillary technologies around it, a lot of the things you see here on this slide, and it makes it so that each one of those components is a pluggable open source capability that we've pre-wired and pre-integrated so that you could pull this entire diagram down as a working operating application in your environment today. Essentially, you can build your own proof of concept around microservices in minutes with point and click capability. And once it's up and running, you can automatically have things like ingress controller pre-configured, more than it is in a default Kubernetes environment. We're also going to take, over time, other technologies like those from Shape and from Big IP and from Volterra inside the F5 portfolio and make those part of it. But more importantly, available today, day one, is taking technologies from our partners like Pulumi or things like Ansible and making sure that each one of these components is available. But I have a request. Part of this announcement is, yes, it's available today. I'll share the URL at the end of my presentation, but please help contribute to this. We would like you to pull it down. develop something, swap out one module for another and contribute that code back, change the scripts, change the configurations, contribute that back. If we as an industry can make pulling a microservices application into production happen in seconds, we all benefit. And so I think you'll find this announcement around this reference architecture is a great acknowledgement that NGINX is just a small component, but if we all collectively work on these different ecosystem tools, we can get this cluster out concept up and running for our companies much, much faster. Okay, so at this point, I've now covered a series of commitments we want to make, as well as a series of announcements that we're going to do, each of them in the coming months and up to a year from now. I have a bonus announcement. We also know that it's not just about technology. We have had an interesting to challenging 12 to 18 months. COVID and the ongoing pandemic has had a large toll on many of us, and we are no different here at NGINX and F5. And so one of the things that was born organically in our environment was, how do we take and give back to the community in a way that isn't necessarily a reference architecture or an open source tool? Because sometimes we need more than just technology to get us through. And so we'd like to announce something called Now Arriving. It's an immersive physical experience that you can go visit that takes technologies built on NGINX, like NGINX open source, as well as other tools, and creates it so that we can have an uplifting experience. So what does it look like? Well, we took an actual physical shipping container, which, yes, is a nod to our heritage as a container component, but more so, we've taken this container and we've transported it into an experience where elevator doors open up. You step into that elevator and you're transported through time to new worlds. Now, how are we actually doing this? Well, there's a series of projectors and applications that are projecting this immersive experience so that you do feel like you're traveling through space and time. And those are the technologies that are based on open source. And you'll have an interactive component where you can pull out your phone, engage with an application, and enter, where would you like this elevator to take you? Where would you like to arrive? And by entering that destination, when the doors open back up, there's your destination sitting right in front of you, as well as all the destinations from all the community members that have gone through the experience before you. And it's just a reminder that even though we're all in this storm, we're all in very different boats. And so as we continue to weather that storm, let's find ways to interact safely with each other. And so this experience, which by the way, is available already, it's in Ballard, which is in the greater Seattle area at a place called The Hangar. Now, I'd love to open it up, but we are still in time where we need to make sure we do this safely. So please make sure that you go sign up for it and visit it when it's safe to do so. And more importantly, think about, can you build this container in your community? We're going to open source the entire plan for this, how to build the container, how to build the projectors, the underlying applications that power it. I would love if a year from now, containers like this were popping up in cities all over the world. Customize the experience for what would be cool to your community. Because I do think to get through this pandemic, we have to make sure that we're doing it together and doing it in new and innovative ways that are safe. So hopefully you enjoy that bonus announcement on something that's available today that you can go learn more about. Okay, that's a lot of information. So let me end by saying, please join us on this exciting journey. I have 3 specific things I'd love you to go do today. First, try NGINX Unit. It's one of the most innovative things we're doing here at NGINX. You can visit it at unit.nginx.org today and start pulling it down and getting through the documentation. Think about how you can build the next generation of application using Unit as the backbone. Second, we know that a critical part of the overall experience is going to be documentation. We try very hard to review and build all the documentation, but maybe we're missing components. Please let us know, review. We're going to do some even more innovative things around documentation in the coming year, but step 1, go to docs.nginx.com. We've completely revamped the experience. We've made it even more intuitive and even more powerful search so that you can find information quickly and then let us know what more do you need from us so that you can build using NGINX open source. And then finally, contribute to this reference architecture I talked about. If you go to nginx.com/kickra or KICRA, it'll redirect you to the GitHub landing page where you'll see a picture of that diagram and, more importantly, get access to the code and all the different components we've built, as well as learn about how we're going to version this over time and build more components, and more importantly, how you can get involved and start donating back. So that's it. I hope you have a great Sprint 2.0. I hope you've learned a lot and will continue to learn more from our great partners. And then stay tuned for awesome demos tomorrow and awesome training on day 3. Thank you very much and enjoy Sprint.